We're going to look at the possibility of mix and matching vaccines. Health agencies are exploring what happens if someone who got the Pfizer vaccine tries a booster from another drug maker like Moderna or J&J. That could widen the net for countries to eliminate variants. And Europe just unveiled its first hydrogen-powered trains. We're going to speak to one of our reporters about to ride the train as European nations pour money into companies developing battery and hydrogen technology of the future. And how does Earth Day look from space? We chat with astronaut Chris Hadfield about the future of space exploration and who he believes is the most influential voice for clean energy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday, April 23rd. I'm Tim Stenevec in New York, and this is Take a Break. Let's do this. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. Well, U.S. vaccine experts are meeting right now to review Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus shot and debate whether it should be used again in the U.S. The shot's been on hold for 10 days after several cases of rare and serious blood clots. At the same time, experts are also questioning the need for booster shots. It's been about 5 months since vaccination started here in the U.S. Researchers are looking into whether or not the vaccines can be mixed and matched for those booster shots. Here to discuss all this and more is Bloomberg Law's senior reporter, Jeannie Bowman. Jeannie, thanks so much for taking the time. You often report on regulatory groups. What are you expecting to hear from when it comes to Johnson & Johnson?
You know, I've heard different things. I mean, I think part of the reason that that they did the pause was to look at the data and see if they could identify more cases. I know that Ashish Jha, who's one of the top experts, said recently he expects the pause to be unpaused as of Friday. And Janet Woodcock did say when they first announced it, they only expect it to last a few days, and now it's been a week. So I guess we'll see. But I think a lot of people are expecting vaccinations to resume.
Well, we're just learning from our colleagues Angelica Levito and Riley Griffin that J&J vaccine-linked cases more than doubled to 15. That's according to researchers, and this is coming from a recent report just minutes ago. Does that change, in your opinion, the way that they're going to handle this data? I mean, it's still a small number of total cases given the number of shots that had been administered.
I don't know if it'll change the ultimate outcome, but it could perhaps, they could maybe make more specific recommendations about population groups, or advise that, maybe women 18 to 49, because I think that was the case, maybe take a certain vaccine over another. But, as you pointed out, I think it's also, while they did find a lot more cases, one, that was part of the reason they did the pause in the first place, was to see if they could find more, if there were more cases out there than the 6 they had initially identified. And two, while of course blood clots are never good, and it's terrible that people died, it is still important to look at the denominator. And you are talking about, at this point, I think 15 out of 6.8 million doses that were administered. So as you mentioned, it is a rare rare occurrence.
It is, and among the cases reported in the slides prepared for the Friday meeting of advisors to the CDC, 3 patients died, 7 were hospitalized, and 5 were discharged. Jeannie, I want to talk a little bit about one of your most recent stories for Bloomberg Law. It talks about mixing and matching vaccines for the booster shot, to be specific, right? So this idea would be that we potentially need a booster. It's something that Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla has talked about and Pfizer has talked about. They are studying it. Why is this an important question to be asking, though?
Well, because we don't know with. It does appear that the Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, we do know, works against some of the variants. But, as cases are going up, especially around the globe, we could have the emergence of new variants. And the B.351 that was first identified in South Africa has shown to work, has shown to diminish the effectiveness somewhat of the vaccine. So we may need potentially a booster shot. And so, if one becomes available and it's just one and we don't know, but you got one from, say you got a Moderna vaccine, but it's the J&J booster that's available, is it okay to take that? And so we do need to study that to make sure that, we can make definitive safety recommendations.
When we say booster, do you mean it would be potentially identical to the initial shots that we get? and it's just called a booster because of the period of time that passes between the first and second, or the second and third?
Well, so that would be so for when I was talking about a booster, I was talking about people that are fully immunized, and then a vaccine that has been tweaked to maybe account for the variants.
So not just another dose of Pfizer, another dose of Moderna, or another dose of J&J. This would actually be some sort of specific booster shot that would be meant to go after some of the variants that have emerged.
Right, and they are studying that too. I think in England, especially especially between Pfizer and Moderna specifically, because they were made so similarly, and they kind of use the same technology, and the efficacy are so similar. I think those are the two that are being more looked at in terms of second dose. But ultimately, in the U.S., I think they are saying stick with the science. This is what we know. You should try to get a second shot if you need one.
What do we know and what do we not know, Jeannie? Because in your most recent piece, you do talk about comparing this to the flu vaccine, which has been studied for years and taken repeatedly over and over again. Right.
So, I mean, these are newer vaccines, but if you think about it, when you get your flu shot, you don't necessarily know. I've never known what company flu shot I've gotten.
I have no idea of any type of vaccine that I've ever gotten in my life except for the COVID vaccine.
Exactly. So that was one of the questions was, will it be okay to if we need a booster? And a lot of the folks I talked to said we probably won't need an annual an annual COVID shot, but we may need a booster, 3 or 4 years down the line. But a lot, as they said, we don't have that data, and so that's why NIH is actually starting these studies to answer those questions.
That's a little bit different than what we've heard from Pfizer, because what we've heard from Pfizer is that we could need a booster within the first 12 months, right?
Yeah. One of the things to note, though, is that unlike influenza, the coronaviruses don't mutate quite as quickly as an influenza virus, and that's part of the reason that some immunologists think that we may not need an annual flu shot. And also because as vaccines ramp up and as more people get protected, it decreases the likelihood that we will have more mutations, right? Because if more people are vaccinated, that virus doesn't have anywhere to go to mutate.
That is the goal here. Get everybody vaccinated, and the virus doesn't have anywhere to go. But unfortunately, worldwide, we are a long way from that. Bloomberg Law's senior reporter, Jeannie Bowman. Jeannie, thanks so much for taking the time. Great to have you on the show. Well, Rapid Deployment Vaccine Collaborative, or RADVAC, is developing a fast and cheap COVID-19 vaccine that can be produced with minimal equipment and skill. Bloomberg News health reporter John Lauerman invited the chief scientist for RADVAC over to his house to mix up some vaccine in his kitchen. Check it out.
Sounds like my friend Preston's here. Come to make vaccine.
It only takes a few ingredients to make a vaccine very simply, very spontaneously by mixing them together. The primary delivery vehicle is called chitosan, which is a derivative of chitin, which is a polysaccharide that makes shrimp shells and insect exoskeletons, and then you have to treat it chemically. We're going to mix together chitosan with some other ingredients. These are synthetic peptides that are made on a peptide synthesis machine.
Peptides being little pieces of protein.
That's right.
And these are little pieces of proteins that we know are in the coronavirus, or similar to those that are in the coronavirus.
That's right. There's two different kinds of peptides here. There's T cell peptides, and then there's some B cell peptides, which they're the parts of the virus that are involved in interactions with your immune system. So the B cell peptides will elicit antibodies, and all it takes is a little stir plate. First thing I do is sterilize the inside of that beaker.
So that is the chitosan derivative. That's the mix of basically insect shells and
shrimp parts, yeah.
Right, shrimp parts, yeah.
So now this is a pipette. You can dial up very specific volumes. We're going to add 2 milliliters of this T cell peptide. Now we're going to add the ionic cross-linker with the B cell peptide. That is done. Cover it up, let it stir for a few minutes.
Okay. What evidence is there that these vaccines work?
Well, we have a lot of research evidence that vaccines like this work, various animal studies and in human clinical trials.
How many doses are we making?
That's about 20.
This is about 20 doses.
That's about 20.
So it's like $1 a dose.
50 cents a dose.
50 cents a dose.
Yeah. But you could make this at scale for a dime a dose.
For even less.
You know,
Yeah.
this is an open source, free and open source vaccine.
Right.
Any country, any organization can set up production and just do it without any royalty agreements, without any contracts, without even asking us whether or not we approve of it. I'm going to take this vaccine. I'm actually not going to administer the vaccine out of the spray bottle. I'm just using the spray top as a sprayer to get the vaccine in my nose. I'm going to spray into the vial. That just makes sure that I'm dealing with sterile receptacles and sprayer. Take some of the vaccine. Nose is fairly clear. Now I'm ready to administer the vaccine. And that's it.
Well, thank you to Bloomberg's John Lauerman for opening up his kitchen to be a lab for that one. And as John mentions in his Bloomberg.com reporting, the vaccine isn't proven to work and it doesn't have regulatory authorization. It also hasn't gone through huge, lengthy, costly clinical trials like those that have been undertaken by Moderna, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and Johnson & Johnson. Now, we don't want to bury the lead on the rest of the day's top news, so here are some stories we do not want you to miss. It's the end of a boom caused by the pandemic. Kimberly-Clark has cut its forecast after a plunge in toilet paper sales. Overall, sales were down 8% last quarter. Meanwhile, the company is getting squeezed by higher manufacturing costs. Kimberly-Clark is raising prices by mid to high single digits on its Scott's tissue business and diapers. And that proposed capital gains tax hike is blamed in part for driving down Bitcoin for the 7th time in 8 days. The world's largest digital currency dropped below the $50,000 mark. Bitcoin set its record of almost $65,000 back on April 14th. And new home sales in the U.S. bounced back last month to the highest level since 2006. That suggests that the housing market is back on track after winter storms hurt demand in February. Purchases of new single-family homes rose almost 21% to an annualized pace of just over 1 million. That figure was higher than all forecasts in a Bloomberg survey. You can always learn more about these stories and stay up to date on the day's news at Bloomberg.com. Well, coming up, Curt Schilling's $150 million failure. We're back in 2 minutes talking video games. This is Take a Break.
Our generation's biggest problem
Climate change is happening.
and the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Welcome back to Take a Break. I'm Tim Stenevec in New York. Video game studios are risky ventures, as Bloomberg's Jason Schreier's new book, Press Reset, explores. Take the case of retired baseball pitcher Curt Schilling, who tried building a wildly ambitious game to compete with the mega hit World of Warcraft. That turned out to be a flop for his gaming company, which went bankrupt, $150 million in debt. Or the high turnover rate at game developers Take-Two Interactive and EA. A survey of approximately 1,000 game workers shows that most had at least 2 jobs in the past 5 years. Here with more is Jason Schreier himself. Jason, thanks so much for taking the time. Congratulations on the new book. It comes out on May 11th. Why is Curt Schilling's story with 38 Studios a good example of the video game industry's broken system?
Hi, Tim. Thanks so much for having me. So I think Curt Schilling's story is hard to believe for a lot of reasons. It's bonkers for many different reasons. But in this book, Press Reset, what I tried to do was I tried to capture and kind of answer the question of why does this video game industry that is making so much money have so much trouble keeping its workers happily employed and stable and prevent them from burning out. And I think Curt Schilling's story is kind of a good case study for that, because this is a company that had insane amounts of money, $150 million, as you mentioned. It was run by a baseball player who had made more than $100 million over the course of his career. Yet it still managed to flame out and leave employees holding the bag. I mean, at the end of things, when they ran out of money, as today's Bloomberg article shows, people were left, they didn't even get their final paycheck. They were cut off from their health benefits. They were laid off abruptly in the middle of May 2012. They just found themselves screwed. And it is kind of it is exemplary. I mean, it's an anomalous story in some ways, but it also kind of reflects the instability that is so common, unfortunately, across the entire video game industry, which is something that my book explores.
Jason, it's a huge shift from when the company started, because in this excerpt that in Bloomberg Business Week, it talks about, you write about how the company was actually trying to attract employees to Rhode Island, and one way that it would do that was by actually taking over the mortgages on employee homes if they lived in another state, if they couldn't actually sell their home. Take us into some of the other things that Schilling was doing that wasn't necessarily the type of thing that would happen at any company.
Yeah, this was a person who had been an MLB player for many years, and he was treated like an all-star because he was an all-star. And so he would get the highest end everything, highest end benefits and salary and perks, massages, ice baths, whatever. And he wanted his game employees to have the same treatment. And so he would get people high-end gaming laptops. He would get them the best possible health insurance. He would do what you just said, which is pretty remarkable, that when they decided to move from Boston to Rhode Island, because they got a loan guarantee from the state of Rhode Island for $75 million in exchange for moving there and bringing a bunch of jobs to Providence, he decided, hey, we are going to help anyone who can't sell their house. We are going to pick up their mortgages, our company, and we are going to pay those mortgages until those homes are sold so that we can make sure everyone moves to Rhode Island. And all of these things, these were things that in Schilling's mind had to be done, including the top salaries, bloating the executive ranks, et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, it's what wound up leading to the company just running out of money. I believe they blew through the majority of their loan and all the money they had in just a year after moving to Rhode Island. And by May of 2012, Schilling was trying to put one last ditch effort together. He believed that with enough persistence, he would be able to do it, just like he had back when he was playing baseball. And he had the infamous story of him pitching and winning the World Series on bloody socks. His ankle was so messed up that it was bleeding through his socks.
Yeah.
So this is like a guy who believed in persistence and grit. And as a result of that, he uprooted, destroyed the lives of hundreds of people.
How did he get into video games? And why was it that he thought, as he said in the past, and you write about, that he could get Bill Gates rich by building his own blockbuster game?
Yeah, well, so he had obviously made a lot of money. He was worth many, many millions of dollars, and he was obsessed with games because he would take his laptop with him on the road whenever his buddies, his teammates would go out to bars. He would just be staying in his hotel playing a World of Warcraft, or like EverQuest was his favorite. He would say that he wanted to stay out of trouble and not go off and not get in trouble with his wife. And he was really into games, and he thought he was talking to some buddies online, and he decided, hey, I think I could do this. I think I could start a company that could take on World of Warcraft. I could be one of the biggest MMOs ever. And to do that, he decided, hey, I'm going to hire all of the top people in the video game industry and bring them all out here and woo them all over the way that the Yankees and the Red Sox would just hire the biggest baseball players. And yeah, I mean, it was this mixture of like his hubris and his arrogance and his kind of not knowing what he didn't know, which can work out in some ways, but in this particular case, it just exploded in really spectacular fashion.
You initially were able to arrange to speak with Schilling, but that ultimately didn't happen. He ultimately did not want to participate, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it was well. So I had been texting with him. I had been messaging with him. He initially agreed to an interview, then just kind of stopped responding. Tried to get in touch with him a few more times, and he was just off and on. Sometimes he would take weeks and weeks to respond to a message and be like, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll talk." And then when I would try to schedule a time, it just wouldn't work out. I don't know if it was him actively not wanting to participate, or just him. That's just his nature, or maybe he's just a busy guy. I don't know. But ultimately, I was not able to sit down with him for the story.
So without giving away the entire book, Jason, I know we can't do that in an interview, of course, but give us a takeaway for people here about what makes a video game company work. Like if you were looking at the successful ones, not the ones that run by Curt Schilling or the ones that have exploded, what is the common thread that makes them work?
Yeah, I mean, video game companies. So in my book, Press Reset, I actually look at a bunch of stories of companies that didn't work, unfortunately. And I actually think it's really, there's no real secret sauce. There's no like one answer for these game companies to work. And in fact, one of the themes that I explore in this book is that even the companies that seem successful ultimately might not be. One of the other companies that I cover in Press Reset is called Irrational Games. And they're the company that made a series called BioShock that was very well known, critically acclaimed, massive success. They released a game called BioShock Infinite in 2013, which I talk about in the book. And then a year later, they were gone. They were shut down. Suddenly, 100 people were out of jobs. And this thing is all too common. This type of trend is all too common in the video game industry. Game developers do not have the kind of protections that many other industries have. They don't have unions. They don't have any sort of leverage when it comes to dealing with management. And it's just an epidemic that leads to so many people burning out and just leaving the video game industry entirely. There's a lot of brain drain in gaming, unfortunately. So yeah, I wish that I had brighter news and I could say, here is how to make a successful video game company. But really, there are a lot of problems that this industry needs to tackle head on in order to make a sustainable environment for its workers.
Bloomberg's Jason Schreier. Jason, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on the book. As I mentioned, his new book, Press Reset, Ruin and Recovery in the Video Game Industry, comes out on May 11th. Well, coming up next, Wall Street's biggest banks are pledging trillions of dollars in sustainable finance. One perk, they're going to save billions of dollars in taxes. We're back in 2 minutes. This is Take a Break.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Lumber prices across the U.S. are skyrocketing. A 60% surge this year sent prices to a record. And analysts, they aren't expecting any relief until late 2021.
If you can get your hands on it, you're going to buy it, no matter what the number is. And the numbers are getting higher and higher. Futures have a daily limit, but in the cash market where I trade, there is no limit, and prices are going up significantly.
Tightness is acute across the entire timber supply chain. Sawmills have had trouble ramping up fast enough to meet demand, while trucking delays and worker shortages at lumber yards have added to the cost. The summer peak of U.S. home building is expected to deepen these supply constraints and keep home prices red hot.
What's happening is lumber's going up, insulation's going up, stucco's going up, concrete's going up, and that's getting passed on to the consumer.
According to the National Association of Home Builders, wood costs have already added more than $24,000 to the price of the average new house. The unexpected boom in demand, buoyed by the pandemic that sparked a wave of DIY projects around the house, full-scale home renovations, and in many cases, purchases of bigger homes. Redfin data showing housing demand so fierce that almost half of the U.S. homes out there are selling within a week of hitting the market. Lumber prices are expected to stay elevated for months to come.
That was Bloomberg's Romain Bostic with a look at how extreme America's shortage of lumber has become. Welcome back to Take a Break. I'm Tim Stenevec in New York. Meet Wall Street's new $1 trillion club, and it's all about ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Morgan Stanley have all pledged $6 trillion in sustainable finance, and the billions that they're going to save in taxes is one of the big benefits. Here to discuss is Bloomberg's finance reporter, Max Abelson. Max, always great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining us. So why are banks making these investments? What's the main motivator here? Because there are some pretty significant tax benefits.
That's right. That's right. Well, first of all, same here. It's always good to be with you. Okay, so I'll take you back to January of this year. Let's go back a little bit. So Bank of America puts out its fourth quarter earnings report, right, as they always do in early January. Buried down there is a line or two of disclosure where BOFA says our 2020 tax rate would have been 21%. But thanks to ESG, and that, of course, I'm sure your viewers know, but it's environmental, social, and governance projects. Thanks to ESG, our tax rate was all the way down to 5.8.
Wow.
Bank of America said, from what would have been 21% to 5.8.
21% the tax rate that corporations in the U.S. are supposed to pay.
That's right. Well, it's not a matter of what you're supposed to pay. I mean, each company sort of ends up with a different effective tax rate, I think that's fair to say, depending on what's going on. So theirs would have been 21. Instead, thanks to ESG, 5.8. So executives at a large regional bank see this, and they talk to a guy named Brian Alperin, and he is at Fossen Company. Fossen Company is a tax specialist, and Brian Alperin is in charge of renewable energy there. And I talked to Brian, and he remembered that the bank executives said to him, they're basically whistling. They're basically like, wow, like, would you look at that? And maybe we should be getting into this too. And what Lenan, my colleague, and I wrote about is that the big banks are really getting into it.
But is it actually something that is good for the environment? Is it actually something that is going to help when it comes to the climate goals that the U.S. and more so countries around the world have?
Yeah, Tim. I mean, I think it's important to remember that there are a couple of things going on. So first of all, let's just quickly talk about the numbers. So JP Morgan this month, $2.5 trillion over the next 10 years. Bank of America, $1.5 trillion. Then Citigroup and Morgan Stanley, $1 trillion each. And I'm bad at math, but I think that's like $6 billion.
That's why we're journalists.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of money, and I think that the analysts that we talked to said that there are a couple of things going on here. One of them is that they're interested in doing some good here. I don't think we should dismiss that. I think we should be skeptical as journalists, but what they said is you have to embrace that they're trying to do some good. Exactly, Tim, as you referred to. They're also trying to please regulators. Regulators like seeing things like this. They're trying to impress shareholders and activists, and of course, they're trying to cut tax bills. This is a story about all those things together.
There's Brett Fleischman, who runs the fossil fuel finance campaigns for the nonprofit 350.org, who you and Lenan spoke to for this piece. said that Wall Street should turn its attention somewhere else, right? Rather than these pledges. They should be focused on getting fossil fuel companies, for phasing out, rather, their support of fossil fuel companies.
That's right.
What's the case that he's making?
Important thing. That's what Brett Fleischman from the nonprofit said. The single most important thing banks can do is to stop financing fossil fuel investments. And he's not alone. Earlier this month, so all this stuff is very fresh. That's a fun thing about writing about this ESG. It's all happening now. Earlier this very month, investors who together manage $11 trillion came out and said, we want the world's biggest banks to phase out financing of fossil fuel companies. So they're not saying you have to stop today. They're saying we want you to phase it out and to back the Paris Climate Agreement. And for now, the banks, I think what the banks are more interested in are things like driving to net zero, which Jane Fraser, the new head of Citigroup, talked about yesterday, closing the gender pay gap, promoting racial equity, and then backing these commitments, because the $1 trillion club is so far a commitment about the future. So they're talking about backing those commitments with real action, to quote Jane Fraser, and measurable results. And that's what we'll be looking at in the years to come.
Max, to what extent do retail investors and sort of everyday investors actually care or think about ESG? It's something that we've heard a lot about. It's something that banks and financial institutions like to talk about, right? That millennials like us are the ones who actually care where they're investing. Is that something that you see is actually happening?
Look, I mean, I think that it's important to recognize that on the one hand, when I was writing this story here in my apartment in Brooklyn, I was thinking, should I say ESG in the headline, or should we say green? Do people, do readers even know ESG? And
right.
Just for the record, ESG did make it into the headline. So we Steve Dixon, our editor, and I, and Lynn felt strongly enough that people do know what ESG is. But as far as how big it is and what's to come, I think it's important to remember that Citi and Morgan Stanley, who were two of the companies that we're talking about here, joined, I think, 40 plus banks just the other day in signing a pledge. And what they say is that they're going to cut pollutions from their portfolio. They're going to cut pollution from their portfolio and reach net zero of emissions by 2050, which, it's in 30 years from now.
Right.
That this is part of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, which Mark Carney, the old Bank of England governor, is involved with. But it's obviously meant to coincide with Biden's global summit this week. It's very much a big thing, and it's very much happening now.
Max, we're going to have to leave it there. That's Bloomberg finance reporter Max Abelson. Max, have a great weekend. I look forward to chatting with you a little bit later on Bloomberg Business Week Radio. Thanks so much for your time. Well, coming up, hydrogen trains are set to make their debut in Europe in less than a year. It's also an industry that Morgan Stanley predicts will be worth billions of dollars over the next 30 years. We're back in 2 minutes to explain why. This is Take a Break.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Welcome back to Take a Break. I'm Tim Stenovec in New York. Well, it's time now for Quick Take by the Numbers. It's where we give you the numbers that tell the story. This afternoon's number is 10%. There are substantial growth prospects for hydrogen trains in Europe, according to Morgan Stanley analysts. They estimate that by mid-century, the sector could be worth between $24 billion and $48 billion. By 2030, trains running on hydrogen could make up 1 in 10, or 10%, of those not already electrified. The French rail transport company Alstom, which is known for its high-speed trains such as the TGV and Eurostar, expects more than 5,000 passenger trains running on diesel in Europe will have to be replaced by around 2035. It also says a quarter of all trains in the region will use the fuel and will have to be retired by around mid-century to meet climate goals. European nations are already pouring money into subsidies for companies developing battery and hydrogen technology for vehicles. This could also be extended to the rail industry to replace diesel train engines. And starting next March, train passengers heading between two areas in Germany will be riding one of the country's first hydrogen-powered passenger trains. The debut will establish a toehold for the technology in Europe. Bloomberg's Tara Patel reports on all things transportation in Paris, and she joins me now. Tara, thanks so much for taking the time. EU lawmakers reached a deal this week to make the bloc's ambitious climate goals legally binding. So how do hydrogen trains play into that?
Well, for the moment, I think I have to quote that child's book that I think I read when I was about 2, the little train that could, or
The little engine that could.
That's right.
I have a 2-year-old, so I'm very familiar with this.
That's right. For the moment, we're talking. You mentioned all kinds of really big numbers in the introduction, and those could become reality. But we're talking about decades away.
Yeah.
But for the moment, starting in March, there will be a little train, a relatively small train, plying a route over about 120 kilometers along the coastline of northwestern Germany that will run on hydrogen. And that means that the only exhaust coming out of the train will be water vapor.
Why is hydrogen the right fuel for this? Why not electricity?
Electricity is also an alternative. I think what the European Union wants to do, and a lot of these many state-owned railways, because that's how it really works in Europe, is to replace their very polluting diesel powered or fueled trains. And the question is whether they would do it with hydrogen or electricity. And this is something that's also a question that's being asked in the vehicle market too, because we're seeing increasingly hydrogen being used in delivery vans and these small projects. So what Morgan Stanley points out, as well as Bloomberg New Energy Finance, is that it probably will depend on the type of route. Longer routes seem to lend themselves better for hydrogen, and very short routes maybe for battery packs. And then you could also use power lines, but that's not always possible for trains because power lines are hard to run if a train is going through a mountain or very small tunnels.
You were able to take a virtual tour of this train, this little engine that could. What was it like? Does it look any different than a typical train engine?
No, it looks a lot like a typical train engine. The one that we were looking at this week looks very much like a regional train. So sort of a little different from a subway, but not too far off. And very modern and very clean, because I think that these trains would be replacing some very old models that have been on routes for decades.
Is this something that would at all affect the customer experience, or not at all, because it's only the way that it's propelled, and it doesn't even affect the car that passengers are in?
That's right. Well, the one thing that the operator, the German operator, so an executive speaking for the German operator who's actually bought the trains and is going to put them into commercial operation next year, as well as an executive working for an Austrian railway, both commented that passengers were struck by how quiet the trains were.
Okay. So even quieter than an electric train?
very, very quiet. Well, I suppose the passengers were comparing it on these trials
to the diesel
engines that they were used to, trying to adjust their headphones when they're listening to whatever they're listening to on their daily commute. But they're very quiet, and they were also struck by the fact that there was no polluting emissions coming out of them.
We have an interesting debate happening here in the United States when it comes to infrastructure and the role that trains play in that. And it's one that there's not widespread agreement on. Can you just give me a general idea of and really explain to viewers just how essential trains are? People who maybe live in the United States and just haven't experienced the importance of trains in Europe and how much this plays into the economy?
That's right. I mean, in Europe, first of all, the geography is different. There are very, very large cities. The population density is much higher. There are very large cities that aren't very far apart. Even though there's a body of water between Paris and London, there's a train that makes the journey between Paris and London in under 2 hours. You can cross France in a TGV, well, almost between Paris and the Riviera as well in a little over 2 hours. And so people, for these journeys of 2.5, 3 hours, even longer, people prefer to take the train because it's city to city. You don't have to, schlep out to an airport and at the time when airplanes were still flying before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Wait in lines and go through customs, go through security. Trains are especially if you're coming from the city center, much quicker.
Rail system is absolutely enviable. In Europe, Bloomberg's Tara Patel in Paris. Tara, thanks so much for your time and have a great weekend. Well, coming up, we're going to hear how one astronaut views, he's passionate about protecting the planet, why he is. We're back in 2 minutes. This is Take a Break.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Welcome back to Take a Break. I'm Tim Stenevec in New York. Well, there are very few people here on this earth who know exactly what the 4 astronauts heading to the ISS right now are feeling. One person who does, though, is retired astronaut and former space station commander Chris Hadfield. Exactly 2 decades ago, on Earth Day, Hadfield became the first Canadian to walk in space, truly witnessing for the first time, as he says, the view of our planet. Hadfield is also the author of an upcoming thriller about the space race. He spoke with Bloomberg Quick Take's Jennifer Zabasaj yesterday on Earth Day. Check it out.
20 years ago, you were not on Earth at this time. Just talk to us about sort of what this moment means for you.
20 years ago this week, I got to have the incredible human experience of seeing the world through nothing but the plastic of my visor. I was outside on a spacewalk. My first spacewalk, in fact, what turned out to be Canada's very first spacewalk. We celebrated on the back of our $5 bill up here. But to be able to pull yourself out of a ship and to be going around the world, every hour and a half, to cross the states in 10 minutes from LA to New York, see all of that history and geography, to see all 7.5 billion people all together. It was a huge personal experience, but it's also just an amazing way to think about something like the concept of World Day.
And I mean, Chris, we're talking at a time when world leaders are convening to try and avoid a crisis here on this planet. And, as somebody who has a completely different lived experience of sort of what this planet is, how does that affect what you think about when it comes to climate change?
We have really serious global problems to solve, but every generation does. We just sort of, it depends on the size of the world. 10,000 years ago, their world was smaller. They weren't all 7.5 billion spread all over, but they had serious existential problems. And, if you go back 200 years, gosh, the plagues that were rolling through, and half of all kids died by 5 years old, or the plague of 1918, 1919 that killed 3% of everybody in the world, or the world wars. There are always enormous, complex existential problems for humanity on Earth. The ones that you mentioned, the world leaders dealing with climate change right now, obviously, this is one of the big ones facing us. How do we feed what is eventually going to peak out at around maybe 10 billion people? How do we feed them and provide fresh water for them and a decent standard of living, and do it in a way that doesn't permanently change the chemistry of the atmosphere and the oceans in a sustainable energy way? That's a really complicated problem, but we've solved problems before. It takes creativity, it takes cooperation, it takes vision, it takes patience, all of those things. And having been around the world, 2,600 odd times, I'm heartened and optimistic by the toughness of the world and the toughness of life, but also by our capacity when we need to work together. It's not going to be easy, and we're going to get it wrong a lot, but there are paths forward, and we really need to both trust but also demand and enable our leadership to do the right thing right now.
What makes you optimistic?
I've had this strange vantage point, like the one I had 20 years ago. When I was on board a spaceship, we went from one side of the sun to the other, halfway around the solar system. And in that time, I got to watch summer and winter swap ends in the world. It was like, as snows melted and green appeared. It's amazing to watch over 6 months. But I realized it was like watching the Earth take one breath out of 4.5 billion breaths. And how refreshing, how tough, how self-healing, how incredibly resilient and rugged our planet is. And also the realization that there has been life uninterrupted for 4 billion of those 4.5 billion years on Earth. So life is also tough. And that's really reassuring. There have been some awful things happen in the last 4 billion years, and yet life is still here, Earth is still here. And it's really just a matter of, can we be responsible enough to recognize the problems that are facing us, and then change our own habits, change how we organize together, change how we do some of the things that we've just sort of accepted as the way we've always done things in the past. We've done it before. We've rallied to face horrific problems. This is another one. It's global. We have to find ways to cooperate when we don't want to, but that doesn't mean we can't.
Given your vantage point of the Earth, what are those things that people here on Earth should be thinking about in order to protect the planet?
I think people need to recognize that it is your own choices that then have the rippling influences, right? Do I drive? Do I walk? What do I eat? Where does my energy come from? How wealthy do I need to be? How much work do I need to do on these things? How do I account for the other living things around the world? Individual choices really matter. And And then how can you inform people and give them motivations to change some of those choices? There's just such a classic example going on with what Elon Musk is doing, for example. I can't think of one more influential person on earth who is shifting general public perception of some of the fundamental changes that need to happen in power generation. I mean, it's so nice to be able to just turn the lights on and not even think about where that power came from. But of course, it has large repercussions. How do we generate power? How do we store power? How do we make all the things run that make life good like they never have before in history for so many people? We just have to get to the fundamental technologies and allow them and accept their change in our regular daily habits so that then it doesn't have the irreversible negative impacts on the planet that are easily measurable, locally, but even more so from the satellites that are orbiting the world.
When we think about young people in the next generation who are just so passionate about, changing the world that they are going to be living in, is there anything that you have learned from this next generation? And what more do you want to teach them and to share with them, especially given your own experience?
Oh, yeah. I'm luckily, because of some amazing technological advances, like the way that you and I are communicating today, or that using the interconnectivity that we've seen over the last year, I hear voices that otherwise I would never hear. And obviously, when you're born, you know nothing, but you have a lot of raw potential. And as you get older, your worldview gets more and more informed. But there's a tipping point in there where you start actually visualizing a possible future and then making personal choices about what's going to happen. And the choices that I made young were based on a certain set of expectations. And the generations that are growing up right now have a very strong, different set of expectations, a different reality to deal with, a different a set of problems, and they're willing to address them. Obviously, they need to. It's not going to matter to me 30 years from now what happens. I'll be dead, but I'm really concerned about what my granddaughter is going to be doing. And so I think we need to give them the tools. We need to give them a clear understanding of the problem, and we need to provide some of the technical solutions that will enable a continued improvement of the quality of life of people all around the planet. And I'm optimistic and heartened by the way that the next generations coming down the pike are addressing it. But the problem is not going to solve itself. If we don't change the direction, then we're going to end up where we're headed, right? It's pretty simple. And so we need to embrace that change at all different levels. And we need to give that as an enabling tool and what essentially is a gift to our children.
Well, there you have it. Retired astronaut Chris Hadfield speaking Thursday with Quick Take's Jennifer Zabasaja. Well, coming up is Caitlyn Jenner getting into politics. We're back in 2 minutes. This is Take a Break.
Generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming,
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Welcome back to Take a Break. I'm Tim Stenevec in New York. Well, looking ahead, here's some stories to watch out for this afternoon. In Russia, jailed opposition leader Alexey Navalny says he's ending his hunger strike. Navalny began refusing food 24 days ago. That sparked concern that he could die in prison. Navalny gave up the hunger strike after he was allowed access to outside doctors. And Republican Caitlyn Jenner says she will challenge California Governor Gavin Newsom in the recall election this year. Jenner is an Olympic gold medalist and well-known transgender activist. Newsom is a Democrat who's been attacked for the way that he's handled the coronavirus pandemic. Organizers have said they have more than the 1.5 million signatures needed for a recall vote. That's going to do it for Quick Take this hour. You can always check out the latest stories at Bloomberg.com or at Quick Take on social media. I'm Tim Stenevec. Have a great weekend, everyone. Much more Quick Take at the top of the hour.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Our generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Good afternoon and welcome to Bloomberg Quick Take, where we bring you today's top news and break down how it intersects with the world of business. Coming up on this afternoon show, we're going to look at the possibility of mix and matching vaccines. Health agencies are exploring what happens if someone who got the Pfizer vaccine tries a booster from another drug maker like Moderna or J&J. That could widen the net for countries to eliminate variants. And Europe just unveiled its first hydrogen-powered trains. We're going to speak to one of our reporters about to ride the train as European nations pour money into companies developing battery and hydrogen technology of the future. And how does Earth Day look from space? We chat with astronaut Chris Hadfield about the future of space exploration and who he believes is the most influential voice for clean energy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday, April 23rd. I'm Tim Stenevec in New York, and this is Take a Break. Let's do this. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. Well, U.S. vaccine experts are meeting right now to review Johnson & Johnson's coronavirus shot and debate whether it should be used again in the U.S. The shot's been on hold for 10 days after several cases of rare and serious blood clots. At the same time, experts are also questioning the need for booster shots. It's been about 5 months since vaccination started here in the U.S. Researchers are looking into whether or not the vaccines can be mixed and matched for those booster shots. Here to discuss all this and more is Bloomberg Law's senior reporter, Jeannie Bowman. Jeannie, thanks so much for taking the time. You often report on regulatory groups. What are you expecting to hear from when it comes to Johnson & Johnson?
You know, I've heard different things. I mean, I think part of the reason that that they did the pause was to look at the data and see if they could identify more cases. I know that Ashish Jha, who's one of the top experts, said recently he expects the pause to be unpaused as of Friday. And Janet Woodcock did say when they first announced it, they only expect it to last a few days, and now it's been a week. So I guess we'll see. But I think a lot of people are expecting vaccinations to resume.
Well, we're just learning from our colleagues Angelica Levito and Riley Griffin that J&J vaccine-linked cases more than doubled to 15. That's according to researchers, and this is coming from a recent report just minutes ago. Does that change, in your opinion, the way that they're going to handle this data? I mean, it's still a small number of total cases given the number of shots that have been administered.
I don't know if it'll change the ultimate outcome.